All right, today we are diving into a really fascinating and honestly pretty misunderstood part of criminal law. We're talking about the hidden crime of abatement. This is the legal principle that can actually find you guilty for a crime you never even laid a finger on.
I mean, think about it for a second. It's a wild question, right? When you picture a criminal, you probably think of the person holding the weapon or picking the lock. But what about the person who gave them the idea? Or the one who helped them plan it all out?
Well, the legal system has a very specific and pretty powerful answer for this exact situation. It's a concept called abatement. This is the whole framework the law uses to hold people responsible for their influence and their support of a crime, even if they were miles away when it actually happened.
Okay, so first things first, we need to get something straight about the word abatement itself. On its own, it's not actually a bad word. It's just a neutral term for the general act of influencing someone. For example, if I encourage you to study really hard for a big test, that's technically a form of abatement. I am instigating you to study. But obviously, that's not a crime.
And that's where we hit the most important legal distinction right off the bat. The law splits abatement of a thing, that general idea of influence, from the specific, punishable crime of abatement of an offense. So, yeah, encouraging your friend to study, totally fine. But encouraging that same friend to, say, steal something, now you've crossed a very serious line. So, how exactly does a person legally become an accomplice, or what the law calls an abettor? Turns out the law lays out three pretty clear paths you can go down. You can instigate someone, you can get into a conspiracy with them, or you can intentionally give them aid. Let's break down exactly what each of those means. First up, let's talk about path number one, instigation. This is all about the power of words and actions. It's about planting the seed for a crime, goading someone, provoking them, or just flat out encouraging them to do something illegal. And even instigation isn't just one thing. It actually breaks down into three different flavors. You've got active encouragement, which is super direct. Then there's active suggestion, where you're the one who puts the criminal idea on the table. And finally, active approval, which is where you give your blessing, making the criminal act seem like it's okay or even justified. To really get what active encouragement means, listen to this chilling example from a real case. A mother-in-law was constantly harassing her daughter-in-law about her dowry, and she would repeatedly taunt her with the phrase, "Why don't you just die?" That constant, cruel verbal attack, that's a direct form of encouragement to commit suicide and a very clear-cut case of instigation. But here's the thing, it's not just about what you say out loud. Let's imagine a husband who never once tells his wife to harm herself, but he's constantly threatening her with divorce, cutting her off from her friends and family, and just making her life completely unbearable. That consistent pattern of behavior can be its own form of instigation, a way of pushing someone to a breaking point. Actions can definitely speak louder than words here. Okay, that's instigation. Now for the second path, conspiracy. This isn't just one person influencing another anymore. This is when two or more people actually get together and agree to commit a crime. So for a conspiracy charge to stick, you actually need two key ingredients. First, there has to be an agreement to do something illegal. But, and this is super important, that's not enough on its own. Second, at least one person in that group has to take some kind of action, any action at all, to move that plan forward. Right? So this preparatory act is the absolute key. Let's say you and I agree we're going to drive our neighbor crazy by blasting music all night. At that point, it's just talk. But then, you actually go to your apartment and grab your giant speakers to bring over. That action, just grabbing the speakers, is the preparatory act. It's what turns a simple agreement into a punishable conspiracy. All right, let's move on to our final path. And this is maybe the one you'd think of first, intentional aid. This is about literally helping someone commit a crime, either by physically doing something or, in some very interesting cases, by not doing something. And this can play out in two different ways. Aid by act is pretty straightforward. You drive the getaway car, you hand over the weapon, you cut the power to the security cameras. But then there's aid by illegal omission, and this is just as serious. This happens when you have a legal duty to step in, but you purposely don't. The classic example is a police officer who sees a crime happening and just decides to look the other way. Their deliberate inaction is a form of aid. Okay, so we've got our three paths, right? Instigation, conspiracy, and aid. But, and this is a huge but, the law treats them very, very differently. In fact, what I'm about to tell you is probably the single most important twist in this whole topic.
Okay, get ready because this is the absolute game changer. For instigation and conspiracy, you can be found guilty even if the main crime never actually happens. Let that sink in. If I encourage you to rob a bank and you decide not to at the last minute, I can still be charged with abatement. Why? Because the crime was the act of influencing itself. But for intentional aid, it's a completely different story. If I give you a crowbar to help you rob that bank and you don't do it, I'm not guilty of abatement by aid. For that charge to stick, the main crime must actually be committed.
So, you might be wondering, why all these complicated rules? Why does the law go to all this trouble to distinguish between these different kinds of help? What's the point of holding accomplices accountable in the first place?
Well, it all comes down to this. The law is trying to stop crime at every single stage. It recognizes that crimes almost never happen in a vacuum. By making it a crime to influence, to plan, and to aid, the system is trying to dismantle the entire support network that allows crime to flourish. It sends a really powerful message. You're responsible not just for your own actions, but for the influence you have on others too. And that brings us right up to today, and a really thorny modern question. These laws were written way before the internet, before social media. So think about it. In our world of viral memes, anonymous forums, and heated group chats, what does instigation even look like? When does an edgy comment or a like or a shared post cross that line from just being a bad joke into being an actual criminal act? It's a huge question the legal world is wrestling with right now, and maybe one we should all be thinking about. Thanks for joining me on this one.